Hi everybody, welcome to How to Audit SQL Server for free. And also, so you know that while I'm presenting this to you, I am also chatting with you live. So please ask questions as you think of them in the chat. And I am Josephine Bush. Well, there we go. Got a preview of a couple other slides there. I am Josephine Bush, and I have lots of IT experience. I work as a DBA now. I work with SQL Server, Postgres, and sometimes Oracle and MySQL. And I wrote the book Learn SQL Database Programming, and I blog on SQLKitty.com, and you can reach me on Twitter at HelloSQLKitty. Excuse me. Today I am going to talk to you about why and how you can use auditing and problems auditing can solve. And it can make your life easier if you go ahead and centralize it. That way you can easily query a report on it. I'm going to touch a little on cloud auditing just to give you a comparison to SQL Server, how it's different, how it's similar, since I know a lot of people are going to the cloud now. So what is auditing? Really, a lot of people in America think of the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and cringe because they think, oh gosh, if I get audited. And it happened to me once. I had an auditor contact me and they said, hold on, because I started to feel stressed. And they said, no, we think we owe you money. It's like, whew, okay. Because people are worried about paying taxes, and then you have penalties on top of it because you owe back taxes or something went wrong with their taxes. It's a giant mess. And you have your internal and external auditors. I always had a good rapport with internal auditors. I always think that's pretty easy, but the external auditors can be scary with interview process where they're asking. It can be difficult. So I see why auditing could have a bad reputation. But I personally think auditing is a good thing. You want to make sure people are following proper procedures, and maybe you don't have procedures, and then you could go in and see the audit. Ooh, boy, I don't want somebody doing that. I didn't even realize somebody could do that. So then you can say, okay, let's not let people do that. And so today the presentation will be specifically about auditing SQL Server changes, like perms and or schema changes, things like that. And so maybe your company doesn't think it's important to audit, or maybe your company's not required to audit, but you're not sure how to do it. Or maybe your company does really want to audit, but they can't afford a third-party tool. I just think even if you're not required, it shouldn't stop you, and you don't need a third-party tool to audit. And I set it up because I got tired of people blaming the database, saying, oh, the database is broken, something changed, something about, okay. So then now I can see with the audit that no, nothing changed. And then they usually run off somewhere else and look somewhere else to find the issue. So I just did this setup on my own in between other projects because it wasn't important to my company at the time, but it was really important to me because I get tired of people running to me, and I couldn't legitimately say nothing changed because I didn't know. But in the end, it was good that I set it up because we were acquired by a more heavily regulated company, and they need actual auditing reports that we review on a weekly basis now. So I was like, whew. So it's in place for SQL servers. My boss was really happy. Now I got to do Postgres next because we have Postgres servers. So anyway, that's a whole different story. But so you're really in the dark without the auditing. Like I mentioned, somebody comes to you and says something changed or broke. You don't really know if somebody changed something that broke it. So it really helps you to see those changes. And maybe a user was set up for one thing. And in our case, we had an SA user, and it was everybody was using it. Not everybody, but it seemed like everybody. And we had to change the password to get people out of there. Auditors, I just got to get them out of there. So we had to audit them because it's really hard to go to users and say, hey, what are you doing? They're like maybe trying to squirrel away over there. They're like, ooh, I'm in trouble now. Or they're like too busy to answer you. Or they don't really know exactly where they're using it. They just know their workflow uses it. They set it up ages ago and they forgot where they use it. So the audit can help them see Oh, okay. I'd say we could see where it's calling from. Okay. It jogs their memory, right? So that really helps. And we also discovered this domain user. I laugh, but that's not really funny. But he was sharing out his domain credentials, like his username and password to people. So because it was running under his domain account, some processes. So when he was on vacation, he needed somebody else to run it. So we caught that too. It was like, hey, can't be doing that. So anyway, you can see everything, pretty much everything that changes in SQL Server. You can see with the audit here. So just a quick review here. You audit because you want to see who's using this, right? I mean, is it improper use? Is it, not following procedures? Just help you report on what changes and give you a sanity check when people start blaming the database. So in SQL Server, you audit with something called SQL Server auditing. Imagine SQL Server Audit. Imagine that's the name. Yay! It's a very good description. So it's pretty much captures anything that happens. It's very flexible and pretty easy to set up. I pretty much use this to see any perms or schema changes, so that I can report onto auditors. And then you access it via SSMS. But you can also use scripts to set up and query it. So the first version that it was available in was 2008. It was only enterprise. And so by 2012, it was in standard for server audit. Actually, I shouldn't say standard. It's in all editions. It's just, I think, it's in standard. So it doesn't have to just be enterprise. So then it was only enterprise for database audit. The nice thing is, and we'll go through this in more detail, is that server audit actually can audit all your databases as well. So when they did that change in 2012, it was really helpful. So in 2016 onwards is available in all editions for both then. So to make the SQL Server auditing work, you need 2 or 3 things, just depending on what you're going to audit. And so you create that audit specification, and that's going to determine where your audit data is going to live. And then you need 1 of 2 things to actually collect audit data, right? So you have your server audit and or database audit. So you can have 1 of each or just 1 or the other. They're not dependent on each other. So that's what actually gets the audit data and puts it in the specification for you, those server database audit. So like I mentioned, the server audit, it can also do all databases. So it's good for auditing at the server level, of course, server audit, and then all the databases. So you have to audit all the databases the same way if you do the server audit database components. If you want to audit database, like maybe you only want to audit 1 database or a subset of activities in 1 database, then that's when you could use the database audit. So you create an audit specification. SSMS is in the security section. You can right click on it, create an audit. It brings up this nice little dialog box, and we can walk through here quickly what these settings, different settings. I tend to just name it audit specification, or usually underscore server name, something like that. I usually have 1 of these. You can have multiples. We'll go through that in a little bit here too. But if you create another one, you can make it more descriptive. Just depends on how you want to name it. But queue delay, I just leave at 1,000. It's the wait time in milliseconds before it audits. You can change that to be 0, 1,000, or more. I don't really see any lag time. I just leave it there. Just leave the default. It seemed to work fine. So next is the on audit log failure. So you can continue, which means this is what I usually pick, because I don't want an audited action to fail if the audit can't capture it. So I just keep going, and you might miss a statement. I highly doubt you do. But I wouldn't know because I said continue. So that's just a risk there. If you have fail operation, that means that it will, so if somebody's trying, say you're auditing inserts and it can't catch an insert, that insert will fail because the audit said, I couldn't catch that statement, so then it fails. Or shut down the server, same concept. If somebody's trying to insert, or I don't know, it's changing perms or something, schema, whatever you're auditing, then it's going to shut down the entire server. So to me, that's too drastic for what we're trying to accomplish. Our auditors aren't worried that if some statements miss that the sky is falling and we can't. But I could see maybe if it was on a financial server, maybe a legal server, something where you literally can't risk somebody getting some critical information out of it or changing something and not knowing. So otherwise, I just wind up with people screaming at me something's wrong with the server because my audit failed to collect something and then failed their operation. And I don't want to deal with that. So with the audit destination, you have some options there. There's file, security log, application log. I just always write to a file because it's the easiest for me. I don't have a lot of auditing restrictions. I mean, like I said, the auditors want to know what happened, but they don't think that we're secretly going in there deleting audit files or not reporting on things. I could see application log writing if you have like a Splunk, like a log collecting application that can read all the logs and gather them in a central repository. And security log is a little bit more secure. It's harder to write to. It's harder to delete from, I think. So, you know, if you didn't want anybody tampering with your actual audit records, I could see that. But yeah, so I just use a file. So then the path is important that you don't put on the C drive. Because even though I'm going to show you here how to limit the files, I always recommend limiting the size and number of them. Is you don't want to accidentally filling up the C drive somehow that you don't have, you know, you can't use the server. So I don't usually I also don't put it on the log or data drive through SQL Server. I just try to put it on a drive that's innocuous. Like we have an E drive for applications where I work. That's a great place for it to go. So like I said, I never let the audit file maximum file size, those radio buttons and boxes there, I never let it just say max anything because the files become difficult to query. They get big and it's going to be really difficult for you to get for the information out. Plus, they get so gigantic, where are you going to store them? If you say max is going to fill up drives and so either way, difficult. And so I do four files of 50 megs each because I'm just getting schema and perms changes, generally speaking. They're not getting that big. They're not that many perms and schema changes. So you know, they can be small. And then there's a checkbox to reserve disk space, but I never do that because my files are really small, but you could do that. So once you created it, it's going to be disabled by default, so you have to right-click to enable it. That drove me crazy one time because I thought, I was going ahead through my whole process. I set up my audit specification, and then I started doing my server or database audits, and then nothing's collecting. And I'm like, I forgot. I forgot to enable it because nothing's going to collect if it's disabled. So once it's enabled, it's going to place a file on disk, and this is where data will live for your server. And database audits, right? That's that specification. You have to put that stuff in. We're gonna go through that in a sec here. So they're gonna be associated with the audit specification. So as the data collects, it's gonna grow and it's gonna grow to 50 megs because that's what I specified. So whatever you specify. And then it's gonna create up to 4 files. And then when the 4th file is full, it's gonna get rid of the oldest file, create a new file. And that's why it's important for you to know how often are these files gonna roll over, depending on what you're auditing. You know, you're going to need to know that because like if you want to centralize like I do, then you need to know how often am I have to collect from this so that I don't miss anything. So before we get into creating server database audits, let's just talk about audit categories. So we have 3 of them: server, database, and audit level actions. And so the server level can get anything that happens at the server level. So anything like you're creating databases, you're creating logins, things of that nature. You, like I've mentioned before, I think a couple times already, you can get database and schema actions at server level, but that would make it so that it audits all your databases the same way. And we're still going to go through that in some more detail. So basically, don't turn on server level for the databases if you don't want to get all the databases the same way. So then with the databases, you can do actual DML because you can't do that server level. So that's kind of a difference. So database level actions can do DDL as well, but they also can do DML. And so it's nice if you want to see if somebody inserts. Sometimes devs want to know what's happening in this table. They don't know. So then they come to us and we can audit the table level, even like what's inserting. So audit level actions are like things that happen as part of the auditing process. There is an audit change group there's actually, I should say, that it automatically captures like if you turn an audit on or off. So that just happens regardless of anything you set. But there are some audit level actions and things that you can set there too. So all of these server level actions, a very busy slide, I know, it's a lot of information. this is server level. So anything, these all start with server, or the login change group there at the bottom is a little bit different. You can pick and choose. Say you just wanted to capture something like an owner of an object, server object change or something, but you can apply them all. Then you can get everything here. So you kind of pick and choose. You do have to pick something, one thing, for anything to be audited. Nothing will happen unless you actually choose something here. So then you have database level access. See, they start with database. Again, these are also available at the server level, these ones, but this, database actions, like when a database is created, for instance, you might want to capture that. But don't apply these at both database and server level audit, because then you're going to get duplicate links. Links. I was reading something else. Duplicate audit records. I was going to say that there are some links on the resources slide, which you can go to the Microsoft website, see more details about all these things. Then you have some schema type DBCC application stuff. Here is also database level things. It's, these apply to database. You can still use these at the server level as well, and it gets all your databases, but remember, don't do it at database level as well as server level, because you get those duplicate audit records. And here's why I was saying earlier, here's where database audit shines, because you can get things like select, insert, update, delete, execute on objects in the database. Now, these are not available at server level. You can only do these inside of a database level auditing. But they're super nice, because I do have people come to me, developers, say, I don't know who's using this table. I've got to figure it out. So then you can do that with this insert, update, delete, execute on things, and then see what's happening in there. So here we go. The first of the two optional audits, the server audit, you can do also under security. Right click and it brings up a nice dialog box as well. I tend to name it server audit specification or underscore server name. Again, totally up to you, just depending if you have multiples or how you want it, if you want it to be descriptive so people can go in there and know what it's doing. Next, you choose the audit specification. See, there's a drop down there. You choose that audit specification you just set up. It won't create without it. It will fail. It has to have that, because it doesn't know where to write the data to, because that's where it's going to write the data. So then we get into those audit action types that I just mentioned on the last few slides. And so these here, I'm going to go through all of these. There's a lot of them. But these here are going to get all of the server level changes and all of the perms and schema changes that happen in a database. So it's basically perms, schema changes in server database level. That's what this here is going to get. Now, if you just want to do server level here, because you thought, well, I don't really want to audit all databases the same way. So then you just take out the one starting with database and schema. And then you're left with just the server stuff. It's pretty much that simple. So it is also disabled by default, and you enable it. Again, no data collects if it's not enabled. So just so you know that. And here's the second of two optional components with your database audit. It is in each database now under security. So you got to go to the database itself under security, and then you can right click and you get that dialog box again. In this case, I always name it underscore database, because there will be some system tables you can query to look at audits information, the specifications of the audits, and it gets real messy real fast if they're all named database audit specification, because you can't tell what database they're in. So that's why I think it's important to name these very specifically. Again, you have to associate to the audit specification, because it won't create. That's where your data is going to go. So it has to have that. This here, these action types are going to get the perms and schema changes on this specific database, only this one. So if you did this at the server level, remember though, don't do this here, because you're already getting all this stuff. So don't do it again and get duplicate data. So I think where the database audit really shines, because generally speaking, I just want to audit all my databases the same way as the server. And I'm getting perms and schema changes. I just put all database schema stuff in the server level audit. And that way, I just get everything in one, get all into a report, and it's perfect. But like I said, when the developer says, I don't know, or maybe I want it, or somebody wants to know anyway, that what's going on in there, I can go and say, insert, update, delete, on these tables or views or stored procedures. And so that's what these action types do. And then you'll notice you'll have to put in different things like object class and schema and these kinds of things, object name, principal name. We can just look at a couple examples here, like insert on an object that's in the DBO schema and testing. It's the testing. And the public. Public just means, it doesn't mean somebody's logging in public. It just means that anybody who inserts to this table is going to catch it. So it's going to catch it as public. And then again, update, you can execute. So execute there is going to get that stored procedure, anybody executing it. Select on that, that's actually a view. You can't tell that because I just know it because I created it. But that is a view there, the testing top 10. So it's anybody. Then we get down to schema and database types. These ones I try to be really careful with because you say you're deleting or updating some on an entire database or schema can get really busy. It just depends. I usually use these when I'm thinking, let's see if we can get rid of this database or this schema because nobody's using it. We think we migrated off of it or we think nobody ever used it, but there's a bunch of data, who knows, any number of things, So I usually only use these last two rows for if I think maybe nobody's using it. But sometimes it's like, I need to see who all is using it because maybe we're migrating to somewhere else or we got to do something. So just be careful with those because they get big and they'll fill up your files or you can't query because it's just so much stuff to try to weed through. So that's just, this is an example of what you could do with the database audit. It is also disabled by default, so make sure to enable it because you won't get any data if you don't. So here's where I'm mentioning that you can have multiple specifications because you say, okay, I have one database or server audit already, but now I want to do something else. I want to do some other little thing. I need it separate. Now it's going to fail because you tried to associate it to the audit specification. You already have an audit specification with a server audit in it or a database audit, and you're trying to add another one. You can't do that. You can only have one of each. But the nice thing is, it says it fails, right? But the nice thing is that you can have multiple server and database audits because you can have multiple specifications. So this table just kind of shows you could have a specification named, I want to audit _ schema perms. And then I'll have a server audit for that. And maybe I just want to audit what SA does. So you can audit with, to create an audit specification with a filter. We're going to get to filters in a minute here. But you can filter on just that one user and then put in a server audit specification in there. So now you got two going. You got two audit specifications. And then you can say, I just need to see if this one table is changing. So you can create another specification for that with the database audit. And then maybe you need to just get schema perm changes, a server level, and a specific database. It's just, okay, there's another specification. Server audit and a database audit are both in there. So these are examples. I wouldn't say you maybe want to use all of these four at the same time because they may overlap. But just so you see that you could put all of these four on and more. I mean, I'm not sure how many things you want to audit. I would say and more. Be careful. You probably don't want to do too many of these. But just because you're going to have so much stuff you can't pick through it. But just know you can do that, so you're not limited. So this is just showing you where they are in the GUI if you want to see where the audit specifications live, the server, the database, and just where they are in kind of relationship to one another, and that it's just to give you a feel for it. So you can query from the GUI, and you can just right-click on the audit specification and then just say View Audit Logs. And it brings up like when you look at the SQL Server log. It looks like that. Brings this up. And it gives you the 1,000 most events, recent events. Maybe there's nothing listed because nothing happened that you're auditing yet. Maybe there's a lot of stuff. And this surprised me the first time I set up audit. There could be a whole bunch of stuff happening in the background because there's like server $, account SQL Server is doing all kinds of things back there, and so you may see that when you set up your audit, depending on what you're auditing, you may see a bunch of stuff in there like, whoa, what's all this stuff? So just so you're not surprised. So when you're in the audit and you want to query, right? So you want to look at things. There's different columns based on the different versions. So back in 2012 through 16, you have a certain set of columns. This is a subset. These are the subset of ones I find useful. There's more than this. You can always, if we're going through here, you'll see there's like a way to query the file with a query so you can see all the columns if you'd like. And then 2017 nicely added a client IP because now you can see where it comes from. So like in 2012 and through 2016, you see the action, but you don't know where it came from. So that can be hard for troubleshooting purposes. If you're wondering why somebody's doing this, where did it come from? You can't tell because you don't have the client IP. And then by 2019, you even have the host name in there. So that's really nice. Very, very nice there. So filtering, like I mentioned, you can filter. You can right click in the GUI and go to properties, and then it brings up the dialog box. Same dialog box when you created it. Just didn't want to add too many things to the creation at the beginning to get kind of confusing with too many things. So then you go to the filter page of that dialog box, and like I said, you can do this when you create it. There's no limitation. I just don't want to add too many things to creating at the beginning. And you can filter on any column. Those columns I just mentioned, you can filter on any of those. And it's just like a where clause in here without a where. So you put in the column and like it doesn't equal something or it does equal something. And so some of these things that I've fiddled with in the past are examples in here. And so like this is where you would say, oh, I just want to see server session principal name equal SA. Now, obviously you wouldn't have to exclude anything then because you're only going to get SA. But like I said, this is just like a where clause. And the SQL statement just doesn't have the where keyword in there. So that is very handy for auditing when you want to filter some things out. And if you said, geez, I'm getting all this stuff from my monitoring tool. We have IDERA, Diagnostic Manager. I don't want to see all the stuff it's doing in the background. So you could say, I don't want to see that. So that's what I'm doing here, like server $ stuff, excluding it, because I don't want to see all that. So you can delete an audit in the GUI. You can right click. You can just, and so a nice thing with doing in the GUI is you can get a dialog box and you can say disable it and then say okay, because you have to disable it to delete it. And then you can do it with a script. There's an example on the side there. You also have to disable it. So you're going to get that error message because if you just try to drop it, it's going to say, yeah, you got to disable it. You can do that with the script too. So I'll show you that on the next slide. So one thing to note is when you delete it, when you drop it, it's going to leave the files on disk. That drove me crazy one time because I thought, well, I deleted it, so the files are gone. No, the files are still there. I guess it thinks maybe you just need them later, so you don't, maybe you do. So if you want them to be gone, you got to go delete them. Another thing I've noticed with deleting things, is you can delete the audit specification, which is tied to your server or database audits, but it doesn't really warn you that, oh, you're deleting an audit specification and your server audit will be orphaned and it won't write to anywhere because you don't have an audit specification anymore. So you got to be careful. If you delete an audit specification and you know it's associated with a server audit, even if you recreate it with the same name again, that server audit isn't going to pick up the audit specification again. There's a GUID in the background that you need in order for it to be associated again. So just be careful when you're deleting things. If you're going to delete if you're going to delete an audit specification, be careful that you're keeping track of what server and database audits are with it, because I went crazy trying to figure out why is my server audit it's not writing anything, but my audit specification is still there. It's because I dropped it and recreated it, and then the server audit lost track of it, and you have to go manually reassociate it. So just be careful with deleting. So you can stop audit. You can right click and say disable, or you can use those scripts. There's a little 3 different flavors depending on the audit specifications. Like if it's server or database is a little bit different. So the thing to note is that if you try to stop it in its auditing actions, it won't be able to stop. So it needs to capture the statements. So if it's just too busy trying to audit, it's like, no, go away because I'm busy. It's not going to let you. And I actually have a horror story about that. So I had this really busy production server, and I was going to stop it. I was going to be so fancy. I was going to stop it because I had to modify it. And then it wouldn't stop. And then queries couldn't complete. And then I couldn't get an SSMS. And then it was like, And my boss came out. He's like, got really quiet out here. It was like whispering with my fellow DBAs. You're like, oops. We had to restart the server, so it causes an outage in the middle of the day. I mean, thankfully it was really short, but it was Whoops. So that should not happen though. Technically, it should just say lock request timeout period exceeded, because like I said, the audit's saying, wait, I'm busy. I'm auditing stuff over here. Go away. So, and I couldn't get it to crash in 2019. I tried long running queries. I just couldn't replicate such a giant server with so many queries running. That's the production server, right, that I caused an outage on. It's just not really easy to replicate that. And the thing is, if you have long running queries, that doesn't matter so much as lots of queries constantly hitting it that's trying to capture, because the long running query, it gets the statement at the beginning, and then that query could run for 18 days or whatever, because the audit's like, great, I already got that. So it's not such an issue. And mine also was on SQL Server 2014, and I don't know if it could be the nature of the version, or like I said, very busy, like high transaction, very large database server. So that could also be a factor. So once it's created, right, you can modify it. You can't modify it while it's enabled, right? That's only my horror story, because I was going to be so fancy and just modify it really quick. So you can do that in a GUI or with a script. The only thing is you can't change the name of it. So you have to delete and recreate it. So that's the one thing there. So to make the SQL Server audit work, you need the audit specification, because that's where your data is going to live. And then you need one of two things. You need your server audit and or your database audit. You can have one of each or one or the other in there. And then thing is, you can have multiple audit specifications. And then you can put server, database audits, whatever, different ones. Just make sure that you're not really duplicating data. If you can avoid it, maybe sometimes it would happen, but just try to avoid having multiple things auditing the same thing, just because you get a lot of excess data collection. It's better not to do that. So now scripting, I think this is so much better once you get a feel for it, because all this click, right click, click, and then I'm in the drop down in the server database audit, and then I add the same thing twice because it seems to let you do that. In the drop downs, you click OK and it just goes and like, whoops, and then or I like miss something. It's a mess. So it's just a lot easier. You can, if you're not comfortable with it, you can set them up in the GUI, and then you can right click and script them out. So maybe you figure out what you want, set them up in the GUI, and then right click and script them out. That way you have what you want, because then you can put them on multiple servers a lot easier. You don't want to sit around clicking all day. So this is a script of the audit specification. This nice thing, it's like really in alignment with the dialog box. It's just, you name it, you put the file path, the max size, all that stuff is all just there. It's so easy. You can do audit, you can do the application or security log in here too. It just changes the syntax. It changes some of the stuff comes out, some things change, but it's pretty really straight. It's even more straightforward than doing a file. And then you can enable it at the bottom, right? The alter it, set it on. Don't have to do that if you don't want to. It's not required. But you don't have to go through the, oh my gosh, I forgot to turn it on and nothing's collecting. So, you can remove that and then it's disabled, but I like that. So creating a server audit, again, really in line with the dialog box. It makes it so easy. You create it, name it, associate it, and then add all these actions, comma separated list. Maybe later you decide, I don't really want to do one of these actions or some of them. It's so easy to just take them out and then put it back. So then again, like I said on the resources slide, there's more details about each of these. And then of course there's the slide with the tables kind of explaining each one, what it does very briefly. But this here is going to capture all the database and server level perms and schema changes. So that's what this here audit will do. Then you have your database audit. Again, really in alignment with the dialog box. So just this is going to get the database, this is going to get the schema and perms changes in the database. It's also going to get DBCC. Anybody runs that DBCC stuff. That's neither here nor there. But that is another thing you can do in database. You can do that at the server level. You do it at the database level. It's just a little oddball one off there. But but remember, don't do this in the database if you're already doing it at the server level, because then you're just getting that duplicate data. So here is the thing where I said the database audit shines. You get the inserts, updates, deletes, executes. I create a separate server audit, mostly because I don't want this stuff going filtering in to my schema perms changes that are going to go in a report to auditors weekly. So I keep it separate, a little separate file, separate audit specification, right? Because that's where it's stored. And then here, it just really follows the dialog box. Again, just, there, it's easy. And like I said, be careful with these, because these, on the schemas and the database, that can get big really fast and make it hard for you to keep up or query. So filtering with the script, very straightforward as well. You'll notice here you actually use the where keyword so that it's just like a where clause. And so you can filter things out there. Exclude, include things. Remember that list of columns that I mentioned before, that's used here. So like my monitoring service, I don't want to see that stuff maybe. Sometimes SysSchema is really busy. I've seen it be really busy sometimes and not other times depending on the audit. I don't know. So sometimes I filter that out, stuff like that. Thankfully, querying the audit is really straightforward. Because I find using the GUI that's great for quick look-see, something's collecting. I don't even use it anymore. I just use the query. I never use the GUI anymore. But it's just calling a function. So you just call columns and call a function. And then one thing to note is the data is in UTC time zone. That kind of drove me crazy one time. I was like, why is this time so weird? So that's why I have some functions in there to convert it to the local time zone. And these columns are what's available in SQL Server 2019. So if you're gonna go if you're in a previous version, some of these columns won't work, so this will fail. So you can't use host name before 2019. You can't use client IP and application name before 2017. So you just have to know that that's what you get. It'll just fail. Then you can take those columns out. So one thing to note is sometimes you're going to see things that you didn't expect. You're like, I'm not auditing view server state. That's why I joined in the audit action system table, because sometimes we're seeing things in the audit. We're like, what? Why is that coming? Because things happen. SQL, that's what I mentioned. SQL Server is doing things behind the scenes. So if somebody's doing something, then SQL Server might be doing things behind the scenes to make that something work. So that is that view server state. So I just like to say my disclaimer again. Just be careful how and what you audit. You can overload or freeze up a production server, just because I didn't even think it was possible, but then it happened to me, and so then it's like pretty eye-opening, quite frankly. Well, I deal with a lot of production emergencies at 2 in the morning, so this, quite frankly, was minimal compared to other things I've had to deal with. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad. But you don't want to do that if you can avoid it, right? So I go with the less is more, because even if you don't crash something, you're still going to have so much data you can't pick through. You might as well not audit at all. So you audit everything, then you might as well not audit nothing. So I know this is a lot to take in. I'm still working ever so slowly on a script that could help you set up these kinds of basic things, like these basic perms and schema changes type things in a stored procedure that you could just put on your server and say, run that. It's a work in progress, but it's coming eventually, because I know it's a lot to take in. So I just want to mention quickly that there is another auditing method that you can use to audit SQL Server, and it's called extended events. And you can audit what changes, but you can also audit other things like SQL Server performance metrics. The nice thing about extended events is that it always has that IP in front, like where something came from. So sometimes I use that on my I mentioned it because sometimes I use that on my SQL servers that are older than 2017, because I want to see where things come from. So sometimes if I need to audit a table or something, you need to audit table's not a good example. I take that back, because that's really where the audit shines. SQL Server audit really shines when it's auditing like database action, like inserts. But if I want to audit SA, for instance, I actually use extended events for that. But you can use SQL Server audit. It's just that my server is on 2014 SQL Server, and then the SQL Server audit in that version doesn't have the IP where it came from, and that was really critical to us. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you're struggling not having the IP hostname stuff. Then extended events can do that stuff for you as well. So, but I'm not going to cover in any detail here. Just know it's there. It's in SSMS and you can use it. So basically scripting, you can do everything in the GUI that you can do with scripts. I mean, you can do everything, and it's easier to create on multiple servers. It's so much easier to filter and query. I personally think it's way better when you do that, so that it's just easier for you to, set everything up. And I don't like clicking and right-clicking and then messing it up, because invariably I mess up my audits when I click and right-click and I miss something and I'm like, oops. So let's go now to a demo. Ooh, demo. Okay. Okay, let's see if I can actually get to my demo. Woo, there we go. Hallelujah. Okay, so you never know with these things, these demos. I'm recording this, but I'm just doing it in one fell swoop. So this is like pretty much like live to me, even though it's recorded to you. I'm just going with it. So, okay. Basically, I have the script. It's up in GitHub. It'll probably be up there again for this, but it's basically the same thing I've done a couple other of these this year. So you can snag it from up there I'm in GitHub as SQL Kitty. So it's up there. Anyway, I just put this up here. Don't run the whole thing all at once, because just don't. Because you want to step through here and kind of see what we're going through here. So you set up the audit in the GUI, right? Okay, we're going to do that. It's just notes to myself, and now I'm talking to myself. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and set this up like I showed you in the... So... Every time I typo that, every time it's like clockwork. So, one thing I gotta check, because I invariably forget to clean this up, and this will make confusion for everybody later. But oops. So you see all this stuff in here is left from some other time I presented or tested, and so it just leaves all these files behind. So before it gets too confusing when I show you this in a sec. So I'm going to put in the E drive, right? Because remember, you don't want to put on C or the data log files. You don't want it to be anywhere where there's, you need to worry about performance on the disks, or you're going to fill up the drive, right? So of course, we're not going to do maximum. We're going to do, no, we're not going to, so you don't want to do that. I mean, you could if you want, but they're going to be impossible to query. So I'm going to say max 4 files. I'm going to say 50 megs a piece. I'm not going to reserve disk space because, it's very little. So there you go. We named it. We just left the queue delay continue. We're going to do a file, max 4 files, 50 megs each. We're going to say, okay. So you see it's disabled. And actually, see there's no file there yet because it's still disabled. But once I enable it, now it's enabled. Now, there you go. It's ready. So I'm ready to receive. So, but it's not going to receive anything because nothing else set up yet. So you got to set up a server or database audit for something to happen. So we're going to set up the server audit specification. So you see now this drop down. So whatever specifications you have set up, it's going to be here ready for you to choose it. So now it's going to go into that file, right? So we're going to do the audit action type server object changer. So I'm going to get this right because half the time I pick schema and then it messes up my demo. So server object changer for real. So this is what I'm talking about. You got to go in here and then you got to figure out. You see they all look the same. It's like, see schema object. I always pick that one and then I go server object. Okay, server object changer. So that's what I mean. It's like it makes my eyes cross and my brain, crazy. Okay, so we got that set up, and then you're going to right click it, right, to enable because it's disabled by default. Nothing's going to collect. So then you'll see, so you still have this little file waiting because nothing's happened. So we're going to create a database now. Okay, so that's good. So just so you know, it really created, yep. Okay, so now we're going to go in the GUI for one time. We're going to use the GUI just so you see. So you see that didn't collect that creating database because we're not auditing for that. That thing that we chose, that doesn't get that. I just know from doing this before. It's a lot of fun figuring it all out originally. But you do see that audit session change, and I will warn you that the auditing of the audits is difficult. Because you may actually need, I was thinking of doing this myself, actually from a from an attendee idea, said maybe you could audit the audit itself. So you can see if it changed because you have the other audit running to watch that audit. The thing is, when the server bounces, everything bounces. Like all the audits, everything's like, tossed in the air. So I'm not sure. Anyway, still thinking about that. But that's what you get. Audit session changed. That's it. You're not going to get a lot of details around what changed and what have you. Anyway, so that's the GUI. Things will list here. I don't like using that. So moving on. So let's say we really did want to capture, if you create a database, that is the database change group. And you just have to trust me because these things, there's a listing. You don't have to just trust me. That's okay. There's the slides I have with the tables that list these actions. And then there's also Microsoft documentation. So you can trust them, I think. Hopefully. Anyway, so you can sit here. So you can go, this is how I do this now. You alter it. So you don't have to right click and disable it and then go in here and click drop down and stuff. So then you set this off, alter it off, change it, put it back on, right? So now we're going to go ahead, we're going to drop the database and recreate it. Okay, so it's, it's back in there again, okay? But what I'm going to do is going to show you really quickly here. Okay. So this is all the columns, right? So this is everything that it collects in here, just so you see. It's kind of fast. We're going fast. Because there's a lot of stuff, I don't care. I'm not going to collect. I've looked through this like a lot. So I've decided what's important to me. There might be stuff in there that's important to you. I haven't used, so some of these may be affected rows with like things that change like in a table, like insert, update, delete. Although I had a DBA friend do it. He said, nah. It's not that great. It's not like something to write home about. So anyway, I have picked out the ones I think are important. So that's what this is here. And this, so now you see it. I dropped the database and recreated it because I added that database change group. So I don't have to scroll back up here again, just so you all see there's no like smoke and mirrors. That's the query. I'm going to put it over there for now so that every time we make a change, we can just pop back over there. So now I'm going to create a login and I'm going to go in here. It's not going to be here because we don't have the server principal change group. So we have to do that, re-add that. We're going to have to drop and recreate this login. That happens every time. Okay, so every time I have to drop it, and then I have to create it separately. I could look into that error, but I don't. So I always forget later. So anyway, so now you see it here, because we added that server principal change group. So now you can see that adding and dropping of that login. So now we're going to say, I want to grant some database perms to that testing user, right? Okay. But we're not going to see that because we're not auditing that. So we're not auditing creating users and altering roles. So we got to add these database role, database principal changes. That's what's going to catch this. So now you see that we're adding these database things like we did before, and now we're adding this to the server audit. So that's going to get all the databases anytime I change anything. So if we had like whatever, how many databases on here, it's going to get them all. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that and recreate it so you can see it. So now you see that I dropped it, you see that I created it, and I altered it, added to those two roles, right? So it's just kind of stacking up here. So you can add them all if you want all at once. I didn't want to do that originally because I thought I could be clever and only have 5 of them and they would get everything I need, but it turns out I need all of them to get everything that I need for schema and perms changes. So as it turns out, not entirely everything, because I will go over that briefly later. Hopefully I have enough time. There is a slide in my extras that goes over, there's a couple audit actions that are very intensive because they get everything as something someone does, everything on the server and database level. But let's talk about that in a minute, because I didn't put that in my slides because I don't really want people using it because it gets really intensive really fast. So anyway, so let's say somebody want to create a table and you want to see that. You're not going to see that, right? Because you don't have the schema object change group. So it is kind of confusing. There's a lot of different pieces and parts. But so now we're going to drop the table, right? So we can see in the audit create. So we're going to see it now. We dropped it, we created it, so that we added that next thing, right? So it's kind of, like I said, stacking on, getting up there. So then I will grant alter on a table, which I usually don't do. I don't like granting table alter to like a specific user. Usually I like do a role or a group. And usually I don't let just users alter tables, but I just want to show you as an example this in the audit. Because that is another, is not there, we didn't see that action because it is yet another audit action, which is the schema object permission change group. So we can just run that right again, and then we can see in here now granting alter on that object. So let's say we want to collect, somebody's going to insert. I only use this in very isolated one-offs because this, like I said, this gets big if somebody's inserting. Sometimes just inserting to a table. Some things in our tables are gigantic. We have 20 billion row tables, and then they're inserting constantly. This could get big fast. So another thing, you know, be careful with auditing sometime with these kinds of things. So that is not going to be in there because you can't even get this at server level. We only have a server level. We have the server audit specification only, right? So you can't even get inserts. So what I'm going to do is create a new specification. And I'm going to put it in a subfolder because I want this separate. I want a subfolder. I want it in a separate file. I don't want to have to deal with this stuff going into my auditing report. So I'm going to set that up. And then you're going to see here, it's ready to go. It's enabled because, right, I set it on. And then I'm going to create a database audit that's just going to get insert on that one object by public, because it's going to get everything. I say everything, not everything. It's going to get insert on that one table. But what I meant to say was anybody doing that, anybody inserting the table, it will get. So we're going to insert again. Now, if I query here, it's not going to be there, right? Because it's actually in that subfolder. So we're going to go into my testing subfolder, and then we're going to do it. So now we just see that. Obviously, you see audit session change because, you know, it captures some random things, you know, that change, right? I mean, it's not random stuff. I shouldn't say that. It captures stuff changed, but it doesn't tell you. I mean, it just tells you some. So now you can see audit session changed, but there you go. It doesn't tell you. It doesn't keep track of all that. It doesn't say, oh, she added this audit action. It doesn't keep track of all that. So we could log in as testing now so that we could see in the audit, excuse me, so I can never remember the testing password. It's the simplest password in the universe, but I always get it wrong when I do this. So let's just do this really quickly and excuse me. Oh, why did I do that? Whoops. I've got testing on the brain. I'm like, ooh, testing, everywhere, testing. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back down here where I said I was going to do something as testing. A lot of stuff in here. Okay, so I'm going to log in as testing and then go over here. And no, God, I'm so used to, I work in Postgres most of the time these days. So I'm used to being PG admin where I right click on everything and practically anything you can get a query window from. Okay, so now we went ahead. Now we're the testing user, right? Okay, you can see we're in this testing. And if we come back here, now you see, I was like, now you see. No, you don't see because I'm not at the right place. So now you can see I inserted before as my Microsoft account, right? I was actually in here as SA. It's complicated. I don't know. This is a VM running on Proxmox, and I don't know. Anyway, this is a whole virtualized environment. So testing. Now you can see that it's as testing, right? Okay. And then, well, you haven't seen this in here, but sometimes you're going to see like a lot of other stuff. So I'm actually going to go back. Sometimes you see a lot of random stuff that SQL Server is doing in the background. We're not seeing that today. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So then I just wanted to show you, this is how you filter. So you like set your audit specification, modify it, set it off, right? Then add a filter here. This is where you could say, I just want it equal to SA. I just want to filter out my monitoring tool just so you can see this in action. I have this here. And then we go back up so that you see that it actually applied it. And there you go. There it is applied, right? So you see there's no where in the filter box, but there is a where when you're doing with script. So just so that can be kind of confusing. So basically you can disable the audits all at once. What I do is I say if exists from those sys tables I mentioned earlier, where it's this, and then you set it off, right? So we can disable them all. The syntax, like I mentioned on the slides, is slightly different for, helps if I hit shift instead of the caps. It's slightly different for each, so that's what, each is in here. Whoop, link. Okay, so then I just want to show you really quickly that they are actually disabled. So I have just gone and disabled them all. So that's what the scripts do. And then you can do the same way with the drops. Just if it exists in the sys tables, drop, 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 drop. Little bit syntax difference, based on what you're dropping. And then, bink. Just so you see, they are all gone. And then note, see the files are still here. We dropped all the stuff. You see in SQL Server Management Studio, it's all gone, right? And then here, I just wanted to take you through briefly, we did that first setup in the GUI. So here, you can create the whole thing with a script, which is in the slides too. And then here's the server audit specification. That's like get the schema and perms changes for the server level and all the databases, right? So this stuff is going back in there. If I can find where I was going to go look, and then see it's enabled now, right? So you got it in place because it's enabled. And then here, this database audit, I only use this if I'm not doing all the database perm and schema changes at the server level, so that you could use. And here's if I just want, right? Remember, if I just want to get an insert on a table, I usually put on a separate specification, totally up to you if you want to do that or not. But then you insert on that. And so here really quickly, using the new audit specifications. So we see that. So you see a lot of this audit session change. That's really me probably creating a bunch of stuff or deleting. So it's very non-specific. But you see all the old stuff is still in here because the files are still on disk. But you can tell the difference between them because you see these here are the older ones based on the time. But you see how this GUID thing is different. See, these all start with D59. This one starts with AC1. That's the new ones we set up, just so you know. So then we have a bunch. So if you go get the script out of GitHub, you can clean up all your stuff at the end. I have all this stuff here to clean it up. I'm not going to bore you with those details right now. You can do that yourself later. So really quickly, I will tell you, because I did mention extended events, right? So that's under management. And you can do an extended events in here, and you can really right click and go through session wizards and stuff. I have another presentation that goes through that stuff. But just know it's there in case you want to get the IP information on older than 2017. It's just another option for you because I know the IP is kind of important to know where something came from. Anyway, so that's in there for you. And then let's get back to our slides and talk about centralizing, because who wants to go querying everywhere to get data out of files? I mean, I guess you could put all your files in one central location and query them all, or there's any number of ways you could centralize this stuff. The way I did it was I wrote the files to the local server to avoid more network issues. I mean, it still has to go over the network to the, anyway, I was trying to minimize, I guess. Anyway, might rework that. The thing is, I have the files sitting on a drive that's on the local server, right? And then I go ahead and centralize that stuff. Just makes it easier to generate a report for the auditors. So how I did it, I started with two things on my audited servers. I have a link server that goes back to the central server, and I have an agent job that sends that data across the link server to the central database. Now, once I've gone through this many times presenting, I realize any number of other ways I could do this that might be better. And that might change in the future. But this is how I do it now. And so my agent job is scheduled hourly, or whatever interval you're choosing, right? Based on how many files and how big they are. Remember to keep small number of files, just because it's easier on you to query it out of there. Especially if you're doing schema and perms changes. You can't imagine that there's that many of them going on in your environment. So they're probably going to be small. I just do hourly because I just didn't want to miss anything. I can't imagine there's that much that I need to collect hourly, but again, I just did that. So basically, there's links about these two things, agent and link servers, in the resources slide. Generally, like I said, I just centralize the perms and schema changes because that's what the auditors need. If I need a one-off for a dev saying I don't know what's going on in this table, I just leave that. I don't centralize any of that. So then on my central server, I have an email that sends the HTML results daily, just so I don't want to wait a week to see if something crazy is going on and somebody's changing something crazy in there. So then I clean that up. I only keep 30 days. And then I actually do have another job that sends weekly, but that's actually in PowerShell because I needed an HTML file to attach to the ticketing system. So that's a whole nother thing. I couldn't do that with an agent job very easily. I couldn't figure it out. I was like, forget it. Let's just do PowerShell. So you'll need the database email configured on your centralized server. You're going to do that way. I guess you could always do the daily email with PowerShell too, but you know, I was kind of after the fact with the weekly thing. And DBmail also on the resources slide. There's a link about that too. So here's the SQL Server audit findings. This is kind of cross section, and I get the event time and I get the audit action because sometimes, like I said, you don't know. It's like, what? How did that happen? Okay, that's how it happened because of that action. So then I just get a partial statement because it blows out my HTML if I get the full statement, because the full statement's in the database anyway, the auditing database on the central server. So I just get the partial statement. I get the server, the database schema, the username. Successful, I was really excited about that at first because I wanted to know. See, we see sometimes people try to truncate or do something in a prod server and we're like, that person doesn't have purpose to do that. That had to fail. So then it was nice to see if it's successful or not, but then I noticed sometimes it said 1 successful, even though I know that it's not possible that that person has that level of perms. So anyway, successful, I don't know. I still left it there because I sort of still thought it was kind of cool, but it's hit and miss whether I think it's really accurate or not. So just a quick summary of the centralization. It's just really so much easier for you to report on and query. And, you know, just use those link servers and agent. There's other ways I'm sure I may come up and put a blog post out, like if I decide to change all that stuff later. But this works. It's solid. I love it. It's been in place for a while now. Geez, I don't know. It's probably been like 1.5 years or 2 already. And the link servers, the agent jobs, they work well. So I'm not excited to change it just to change it, but I think it works really well. And so then I send it agent job with an agent job an email daily, and then I actually use PowerShell to send the weekly with an attached HTML file. So just depending on your reporting needs, that's the kind of stuff you can do there. So we're just going to go through some high-level cloud options because I know where I work, cloud. We're in heavy migration to the cloud. Most things we're trying to do, unless they're gigantic servers that can't really go to the cloud yet, which is some here and there, mostly Postgres, are going up there. Well, I shouldn't say mostly Postgres, because some of our SQL Server servers, we're having a hard time figuring out how we're going to put them up yet. But we have a mandate to be up there in 2.5 years. So that being said, you have to audit in the cloud too. So at any rate, some are very similar and some are different. So if you set up a VM in the cloud, you're getting exactly what I showed you here. Because you have drives, I don't know, you have different, you'll have that temp. Don't put your audit stuff on whatever. There's a temp. Sometimes there's that disposable drive. There's a drive that the server restarts in a VM in the cloud. At least in Azure, it goes away. Don't put your stuff there. That would be bad. So some of these are really different though. So the other ones that are similar are Azure SQL Managed Instance and AWS RDS. Basically, SQL Server auditing, same. So you're going to have to use the cloud storage because you don't have a drive sitting underneath like on a VM. So then you have Google Cloud, which I personally haven't used, but it looks like the cloud audit logs they're in a Google portal. I have read about it, and It's somewhat similar to Azure SQL, which Azure SQL doesn't have server database audits. It doesn't have SQL Server Audit. It has, I should say, it has server database audits, excuse me, but it doesn't have SQL Server Audit the way it is. So it's basically, you set it up in the portal and then it's all stored in there. Because I know a lot of people move to Azure SQL from SQL Server. Then let's take a look, because it is different. And so you can enable it for free or to cost, just depending on the storage location. There's like a free log analytics storage, which stores up to 500 megabytes per day, up to 7 days, last I checked anyway, because I guess that could change. And so that's just, I think, for testing, because if you have a prod database, it's probably unlikely that you might get away with that little, because it doesn't allow you to filter. It doesn't allow you to select specific actions. You basically, you turn on the server and it applies to all the databases under that server, I could call it a server. And there's no option to say, don't do database auditing, or don't do this, don't audit that. It just gets everything. But you could just audit one database, not the server level. So just don't turn on the server level and then the database. They kind of recommend you do it just server level, just get everything. Of course, because that uses more storage. But anyway, there's no filtering on the audits either. You just get everything, right? And so it is available in all the pricing tiers, though. From what I could see, I even tried basic. It looks like it works there too. I'm still in progress setting this up because I've been so busy on Postgres lately. I haven't had time to set up my Azure SQL auditing yet. So here's a high level how you turn it on. So you turn it on at the server level, like I mentioned, and you just literally say on. So that's kind of nice, simple. I mean, you don't have to know all these actions and these clicking and right clickings or queries, right? And scripts and things. And then I was just using log analytics to take advantage of for free storage just to test it out. But you might run out of space, right? Because there's not a lot of room there. If you've got a production service, probably busy, because it's going to get everything it's doing. But at least you can test it for free. And so something's confusing to me. So you turn it on at the server, but you actually have to view it at the database level. So you got to go into each database and you click on view audit logs. Then if you started a log analytics, because you do have some other choices. I'm not going to go through all the choices, but you could store them in a different storage, and it's actually like files that you could query from that storage. It's a little more complicated. So you can go into log analytics, because that's where I set it up in this case, and then you can use this custo query situation. And so then you can, I did something, so you can actually see something, create and alter a table there at the top. That's stuff I actually did. And so the thing I just thought is that I might put all of my databases in prod, my Azure SQL databases, in the same log analytics, so that I could just custo query it out, just a thought, because I don't want to have to go across multiple different storage locations and stuff. But again, remember, you turn on the server level, and then you view all the data at the database level. I mean, you can turn on a database level, but remember, don't turn on the server level. Same concept in SQL Server Audit. You don't want to be auditing the same stuff at the server level. You're getting down a database. You're just getting a lot of duplicate stuff. It's not the end of the world, but also, you don't really want to have a lot of duplicate auditing if you can avoid it. So just a quick summary, some are similar, some are VM's exactly the same, but some are different. And Azure SQL does have that functionality in the portal, but remember, you can't filter anything, so you're going to be picking through, I was figuring out custo and how to filter stuff out of there, so I don't want to see it all. We're thinking of centralizing. I know some of my Postgres DBA friends will cringe when I say that we were thinking of centralizing all of the SQL, all of the auditing database, the database auditing data to SQL Server, even from Azure potentially into SQL Server and Postgres, because that's my central. Anyway, we'll see if that happens or not. But so yeah, you can audit in the cloud. So it just depends on what you choose there. So quick audit review, you need that one audit specification is required, and then you have to have one database and or one server audit, so the data actually writes there. So you got an audit specification just sitting there waiting without those other bits. So you can set up and query via the GUI or the scripts, right? Like I said, I find the scripts easier just because if I have a registered server list, I can just apply them across a lot of different things too. So it just makes it easier. But remember not to audit so much you can't stop or the audit or easily query the data. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And even if you're not going to crash your server, don't collect everything and under the sun. Here's the resources slide I mentioned, and I just wanted to give a special thanks to Microsoft for supporting the Data Platform Geeks and helping make the conference possible. And thank you to Data Platform Summit, though. This is a great conference, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. There's some of my contact information. It looks like I do have a little bit of extra time, so I can go through really quickly. There are some extra slides at the end here, and they go through a few different things. It's going to be super fast here, but I just want to get you like a quick overview. The slides will be up. I'll definitely put them in my GitHub. I'm not sure how the conference may be handling slides, but these things I didn't want to include in bold red there on this slide. I did not want to include in the main presentation. I want to separate out because be careful with these. These add database object access, schema object access. Those get everything somebody's doing. And you'll see over here, I'm only doing auditing user because they will overload your server. It's, so I just want to show you that is how you would audit SA with a SQL Server audit. Say you wanted to get everything SA is doing or something. Those two in your server audit specification will get that. But they are dangerous if there's a lot going on. Then there's, of course, these special one-off cases where somebody might be changing agent jobs. Somebody might be doing things in there. We do have people that have access to do that. It's complicated and a long story. I don't have a lot of time. So then I do this. It's not perfect. It just gets the base. Somebody changed something. It's not great. Same with SSIS. It's less than perfect, but it at least gets some of what somebody's changing something. Again, here's what I mentioned before with the audit specifications. You can list out from the sys tables like what you have set up. So if you have a bunch of them, I usually only have one. This is not like huge deal to go into system tables, but it shows you how they're configured. Same thing with the server audit specifications. It shows you like what audit actions are in there, if it's enabled or disabled. Same with the database audit stuff. Just so you know that's out there for you to use those system tables. And I'm just going to pop back over here to thank you. It's really great. Without DPS organizing all this, I wouldn't be here. So I really appreciate it. Again, thank you to Microsoft sponsoring this conference. And it brings us to the end of the session, but I am still available to chat in the Q&A with questions, and you can connect with me in the virtual networking lounge as well. So thank you for attending, and please feel free to contact me. There's my contact information.